Welcome back. The Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency will build new cyber protections for the .gov domain. It's asking industry for information about registry and lifecycle services for agency domains. Ron Marks is president of ZPN National Security and Cyber Strategies, former CIA official and former intelligence advisor to two Senate majority leaders. Ron, welcome back. It's good to see you again. Do I read this as another step towards CISA consolidating autonomy over civilian agency networks, or do I read this as just a one-off as part of its effort to provide more cyber services to the individual agencies?
You know, it's interesting you say that. I mean, there's this grand collision going on here right now. All of a sudden, you've got, you've got a national cyber director coming in. You've got actually the head, Jen Easterly, coming in at the head of CISA. You've had this executive order out there. You've got this infrastructure build. You've got the national security strategy. I mean, everybody's sort of on a move here right now. You know, I think for CISA, it begins to lay the groundwork. I think it's beginning the process of, at least on the domestic side, telling people, you know, all right, you know, what do we need to do here? How do we protect ourselves? You know, how we're coordinating with DOD, again, I'm concerned about that. I mean, if you're a company at this point, you're up to your elbows in CMMC right now. You've got someone else sort of telling you what to do in these different areas. If you're the government on this side, great. You know, what kind of rules do we need to follow here? I think you're going to see some things all over the place. I am sure they're going to be written in Shakespearean language in terms of the response, to be careful not to commit too much, but at the same time, you know, again, try to get something laid out. So I think it's an initial step. And then I think we're going to have to look at the results and then see where we go from there. At
what point do you expect to see, if ever, other pieces of cyber authority or autonomy move from other places in the civilian sector to CISA? One in particular that I think of is FedRAMP, that's lived at the General Services Administration for, what, 10 years, 12 years, something like that. And I wonder if at some point that doesn't become something that moves to CISA, or whether people start to talk about whether it should.
I know you've heard me ride this hobby horse before, so let me get back up on it again. There is a reason for a national cyber director, and one of the issues for them is who does what. Because while CISA may be an agency at this point, it's going to be competing with a lot of other agencies at an equal level, and that's fine, it should. But they can essentially say, well, look, you're not controlling our budget, you're not controlling our program, you're acting in an advisory capacity here. Until someone says, all right, boys, this is it, this is going to be the centerpiece, this is how we're going to direct the civilian side, this is how they're going to interact with the defense side, this is how we're going to do it for the U.S. government writ large, it's not going to work. You can try to run this thing out of the NSC. NSC is not an operational organization. You can try to run it out of OMB. They're not that kind of operational organization. You've got the National Cyber Director. You know, I know Chris Inglis is just on the ground at this point, probably with a few staff, but this is a good example of the kind of thing that he should be doing, saying across the government, okay, now, CISA's got the charge, let's move. I've got program and budget sitting up here. Let's cooperate and get things moving.
Yeah, the more you talk, Ron, the more pieces I think about that are distributed different places, the more pieces that I think of them as a mosaic, that it will be Chris Inglis's job to put onto this broader picture so that we see a picture rather than just having tiles laying all over the place. Am I thinking about it the right way, do you think?
You know, I think so. You know, again, if I'm in the private sector, and I've talked to a lot of my friends in the private sector at this point, I mean, they're looking for the government right now. They're saying, all right, well, they come in four varieties. Either don't bother us, tell us what to do, but don't cost us too much and take your time about it. And the fourth is, who do we talk to? You know, it's not just CISA out there. It's FBI providing advice. NSA now has a private outreach. NIST, of course, has been the great rules setter throughout this process, and well done them. You know, and DOD is coming in. The entire defense industrial base at this point is looking at CMMC. And, you know, the initial reports from that have not been good. And I don't mean in terms of DOD's capabilities of putting it together, but in the fundamental, you know, grading of these defense industrial based companies. So we got a lot of ground to cover here. And again, you need to have a coordinator who can look at civilian as well as defense sector, pull it together for the USG, and then push it ahead. And that goes back to a national cyber director. There's a reason these guys built that. And again, my fingers crossed in terms of program and money. It's the only way he's going to get listened to.
Another place where there is cyber authority is within the individual agencies, at least authority to interact with the pieces of the private sector that agency works with, regulates, or whatever. I'm thinking of the CISA office at the Department of Energy, and
Right.
there are others across government. At what point does somebody start to say, do you think, again, if ever, we need to kind of reform these efforts, consolidate them, streamline them, some other adjective that we hear in Washington time after time after time, Ron?
Well, I think budget may do it to some extent. We're going to see, I think, some flat years coming ahead here, which, as you know, means negative growth overall. So people are going to start looking, I think, at some duplication. You know, again, this goes back to the ugly business of building a budget. I realize budget building is about as sexy as looking at selling the car based on the transmission. But the fact of the matter is, it's the money that matters. I'm well aware of the DOE challenge in terms of their setting out standards. I was reminded about it personally at one point, in fact, by someone who ran it and was somewhat dismissive of the DoD effort. And all I can say on that is that we've got to get our collective act together at this point. We just cannot afford, financially, as well as from the number of break-ins into this rickety cyber building that we've built, that frankly, if it were a building, it would have been condemned by now. We've got to get our collective act together on this. Again, this goes back to a national cyber director with budget and program control who can say to a DOE, look, I have the president's ear at this point. I'm in charge of this program overall, and you need to do X.
Less than a minute left, Ron. You've used the word budget or referred to it, by my count, 614 times in this interview. I may be a little bit off. Is that the main thing that you'll watch in the weeks and months ahead?
Yeah, absolutely. I realize that mantra at this point has been drilled into me, but it's also been drilled into me for 40 years worth of experience, which is that when you sit around the table to negotiate, especially when I was dealing with efforts in an intelligence community that had 16 separate members, even if they had a couple of different pots of money that were coming from, people will listen to you and will respond to jawboning to some extent. But ultimately, if you have financial control, for instance, as an Office of Management and Budget does, in the final analysis, this is a decision that is made on their part. You have the budget, people listen. If you do not have the money, control, or at least some suzerainty over it to say where it goes, or at least suggest strongly where it goes, then you're just not a player.
Ron Marks, thanks very much as always.
Thank you, Francis.